there everybody, it's Cathy from Smile Spinners. Today we are going to talk about infinity scarves. Infinity scarves, we've been making those for probably 10 or 12 years now here at the shop, so I have a whole stack of them that I can show you. They can be wide, they can be narrow, they can be soft and furry, they can be out of minky, they can be out of faux furs, they can be out of flannels and velvets, actually jersey knits, gauze, you name it, you can use it for an infinity scarf. If you watched my tutorial the other day on a yarn dyed scarf, you had to have a fabric that was the same on the front side as the back. With an infinity scarf, because it is just a big round tube, we're never going to see the back side of the fabric, so we can use just about anything. For today's demonstration, I have chosen a really beautiful minky from Michael Miller. This one actually is probably about 60 inches wide, and I've cut it today to be 27 inches wide. So when I make my tube, it actually will be half of that width. You can do the math. So that what I'm going to do to get this whole thing started is to just take my piece of fabric that I've just gotten from my most favorite fabric store, Smile Spinners, and I'm going to align my two cut edges. I don't even have to worry about taking off my salvage edge. And if you've sewn with me before, you know I love to pin. And so that I'm gonna start pinning my edge. And the big thing with that you have to remember to make it so that we can join our edges is that we want to put a pin in about 4 inches from that end. A little bit more, that's just fine. It doesn't have to be exact, but everybody always wants some sort of number. Oh, I'm gonna realign here because my end isn't actually lined up. And I generally put 2 pins in where I want to start and stop because I often am not paying quite as much attention to what I'm doing as I should be, and then I sew too far and then I say a lot of swear words. So we're gonna do that at both ends. If I had more pins, I would probably pin about this far along the edge, all the way until I got down to here. You probably, as you're sewing this, want to use a walking foot. I am on a FAF sewing machine. I have a built-in walking foot so that I will not get any fabric creep, but you want to be able to control that while you're sewing. All right, here we are at our sewing machine. Remember to start sewing in about 4 inches from the end. If it's a little bit more, it's okay. Less is not good. We're gonna sew this in a 1/2 inch seam allowance. I actually am sewing on a FAF, which has a built-in even feed system. If you are not on a FAF with a built-in even feed system, you should probably use a walking foot. But if you don't have either, pin a bunch so that you don't have that fabric lump, I call it fabric creep, in front of your presser foot. You're just gonna start sewing along here. You don't have to be in any kind of rush. Make sure your seam allowances stay aligned as you sew. And we're just gonna keep repeating this process until we get to the other end. And now we're here at the other end, so we're going to stitch to our pins or close to it. And I'm going to do a little back stitch. My machine actually ties off and cuts its thread and lifts its presser foot, and we're done. It looks like I need a vacuum cleaner. This minky stuff is getting all over me. Anyway, what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna reach my arm inside here and grab the opposite end, and I'm just gonna pull it through here like this, and oh, it's looking like a scarf already. Now, if you know me, I would probably go to my ironing surface now and give it a press. Just watch that the item that you're pressing, the fabric, can stand to be ironed. I'm not so sure about some of those furs. You'll have to test your iron. But then how do we get the ends closed up? I actually have seen some patterns where they have you take this end and kind of stuff it in here somehow, and I don't really think that's very easy to do. So I actually, this is not of my doing, saw someone do it just like this. Because we've left this open, we can now take our end and bring it around to here, and we're just gonna match it up. And we have a nice free project sheet for you that you can actually see how this is done. But oftentimes people are like, what? I'm doing what? That just doesn't seem right. So that for you to be able to see me do this is probably pretty helpful. So what I like to do is grab the right end of it and bring it to the left end. You can see I have the seam facing towards me. Now we will have 4 layers, right? And we're not just gonna sew them together like that. What we have to do is peel back the top one and peel back the bottom one. And we're gonna then pin the 2 that are left. So layer 1, 2, and layer 3. And we're just gonna work towards pinning them until we get to the fold. Because this is one continuous piece, as we get to where the fold would be, we're just gonna continue on around, and you're gonna give it a couple of shakes to make sure that it's just 2 pieces together, and we're just going to keep pinning until we get around to this other side. It looks a little crazy. Just work with it, give it a couple of shakes, a couple of pulls, and you'll see that you now have one long seam that joins the right end and the left end of your scarf. We're going to go back to our sewing machine. In our pattern directions, it will say to sew this in a 1/2 inch seam allowance. If you remember, I never had you remove the salvage edge, so that in some fabrics that where the salvage edge, where there's writing along the edge, may be wider than a 1/2 inch. So then, if that's the case, just make your seam allowance a little bit wider. It really doesn't matter. We just want to get this so that we sew those together. So carefully, I am going to start to sew this end together. I am going to make sure that I'm very cautious as I sew, because if you remember, we actually kind of had this all sort of wrapped around, and we want to make sure that we don't trap anything in underneath there and stitch something in that we don't want to stitch in, because then you have to get out your seam ripper. And we all know that getting out our seam ripper is not one of those fun things. So I tend to stop fairly often so that I can make sure that everything is laying the way it's supposed to be, and I don't stitch anything in place in the wrong place. all we're going to do is take this and kind of flip-flop it around, and our end is closed. The only step that's left to do, I would press these open, but is to press your seam allowance. Remember, we did a 1/2 inch. You're going to press that under. I would put a couple of pins in there, and then you can top stitch all around here. To top stitch it, I would sew about 1/4 inch from the edge, but that's one of those things that really doesn't matter. I do have to tell you that sometimes if you were to look at my scarves, I have pretty long hair, so that sometimes I don't even sew this part shut and no one ever knows. But if you're giving it as a gift, you probably should stitch it shut. I hope you have enjoyed watching me make the infinity scarf. Have fun sewing!